thank you for tuning in to our October Jobs Talk with Eightfold AI. We have a special guest joining us this month while our chief economist is on maternity leave. We are pleased to welcome Colin Emerson, Strategic Account Executive, alongside our Senior Director of Product Marketing, Jason Serrato. Jason and Colin will share real-time insights on the JOLTS report, jobs report, and more hot topics in talent today. So grab a coffee, kick back, and spend the next 20 or so minutes listening to what's currently top of mind for business leaders. With that, I'll hand it over to Jason Serrato for some JOLTS, jobs, and Java.
Thanks, Callie. Here we are. We find ourselves again. It's the first Friday of October, believe it or not. There's a slight chill in the air. Maybe you have an apple cider donut, nice pumpkin spice latte. You're getting in the mood, fall season. But it's also the first Friday of October, which means here we are, JOLTS, jobs, and Java, talking about the jobs report. So happy to be joined by Colin. Thank you so much for joining me, Colin. Is this how you thought you'd be spending your Friday morning?
No, not necessarily, but I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate it. I love the conversations we have during the course of the week, and we figured let's get you on the chat and get your thoughts on this. So here we are, a few minutes past the release of the jobs report this morning. Another very strong jobs report. Today's report, jobs rose by 336,000 jobs, with unemployment unchanged at 3.8%. Blowing past a lot of the forecasts and predictions. So the job number continues to stay ahead of where people were predicting it to be. The estimates were somewhere between 170,000 and 220,000. And here we find ourselves almost at 340,000. The biggest gains occurred in leisure and hospitality, government, healthcare, professional, scientific, and technical services, and social assistance. So we also continue to see growth in specific sectors. Here we are in the industry. As we think about this, we've always talked about there's always some elements of good news mixed with some bad news, and you have to kind of decipher what's happening in the market. For purposes of this conversation, we're always focused on what does this mean for HR professionals and for the organizations that we're supporting and the people that we're talking to. I think one of the things that jumped out at me was there was a lot of conversation around even though the number of hires has increased and the market is looking good, a lot more scrutiny over job postings and job descriptions. And people, we've had this on previous coffee talks last month with Rebecca. We were talking about people really reevaluating their needs and re-examining the type of work that they're hiring for and the roles that they're hiring for. And I think we're seeing that now. There was a lot of talk around fewer postings, but more applicants per posting. Colin, what are your thoughts there? Are you seeing some of the same things in some of the people you're talking to, or what are your immediate reactions to that?
Yeah, Jason, I am. I think it's very interesting. The easiest way to think about it from what I'm hearing is TA in particular, TA professionals are finding that it's more competitive in terms of candidates, the number of candidates applying for the jobs, and thus the candidate competition for the open roles that they have. And then that's very interesting because they are now thinking about how do they take what might be a larger candidate pool and find the best fit matches for the roles, because they're seeing more applications than they were before on a per position basis, if you will. And I would also say that business leaders in particular are driving a lot of these talent decisions because they are reevaluating their strategies as they're thinking about what does the overall macroeconomic situation look like. What does the impact of generative AI mean for what they need in their business strategy, and thus what they need in terms of their talent to deliver whatever the goods or services their organization does. And so that is a way of getting back to what you've said. There's more scrutiny over the individual job postings because the business needs that are driving what organizations are looking for from their talent are changing. A big jobs report is exciting for some. As you mentioned, almost double some of the estimates. It also means that there are potentially shifts and changes in the way that organizations are seeing what they need and what the future holds, for them based on macroeconomic conditions.
Yeah, I was looking at our data, and when I looked at our data, we track hires across all of our customers kind of in our
Mhm.
aggregated reports, and we look at it on a weekly lens, week to week.
Mhm.
Hiring has been rather consistent for the most part of this year. So
Yeah.
the hiring has been consistent. I think the postings, the evaluation, the opportunities are changing. So what's happening is we talk a lot about kind of the four concepts of how people are addressing work these days with recruit, retain, redeploy, and re-engineer. And I
Mhm.
think we're in the middle of people starting to get deeper in the water around that re-engineer part
Yeah.
of that equation, and truly starting to figure out, what is the work that is in front of us to be done? What is the work that is in front of us to potentially automate, right?
Mhm.
Or get done through other means. And that's where these openings that remain are getting very specific for
Yeah.
very specific skills for a very specific profile.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, if you take, not to make the whole conversation about generative AI, but if you take the shift that a lot of organizations are making in terms of how they think about infusing generative AI from a business perspective, that necessitates all kinds of talent decisions, like you said. That the four R's, what you talked about. Do they need to build, borrow, or buy new technical talent? Do they need to re-engineer the way that work is done internally, which means that their internal employees who currently work for them need to be upskilled or retrained just to be able to interact with new technologies, not because they have to build the technology, but because they're going to interact with new generative AI technologies to get their jobs done. And so there are all kinds of elements there, I think, to the re-engineering point that you made that, again, are driven by larger shifts in what the businesses are trying to accomplish. And that's really, what I focus a lot on with, with the business leaders that I work with is, what are the business needs, the business strategy, your 5-year plan, and how does that dictate what you're doing with your talent? And frankly, do you know what you have now based on what you say you're going to need 1, 3, 5 years from now? And that gets to all of the ideas of recruit, retain, redeploy, re-engineer. I mean, all of those are elements of trying to realize that talent strategy, right? Assuming you have one tied to your business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're throwing out the four R's. You mentioned the three B's. There's even a fourth B, build, buy, borrow, or bot. So whichever you prefer, the four R's or now the four B's, this is what's top of mind for people that are trying to steer the organization towards the future.
Mm-hmm.
I also think, with anything, there's a lot of mixed messaging. The same way we're saying that there's fewer positions and more applicants. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week that discussed people being more reluctant to switch jobs.
Yeah, I saw that.
How do you wrap your head around that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, right, that creates cognitive dissonance when you think about it, right? You say, oh, there are so many job openings out there. What's I think the exact number? There are 1.5 jobs for every unemployed individual right now. I think that's the statistic. And yet, to your point, people are more reluctant to switch. I think there are several reasons for that, and this is coming from both a candidate perspective as well as what I'm hearing from talent leaders. One, I mean, in many industries, tech in particular, right, there were layoffs over the last, let's say 18 months. And so people who have a job that they feel somewhat secure in are more reluctant to jump ship, if you will, because of the, what they've seen from a layoff perspective. But I would also say that from again, going back to the macroeconomic situation, people are taking risky bets right now because they're not sure where the economy is going and how that might impact initial reactions to the idea of why are people more reluctant now. And talent leaders, frankly, they feel the same way from what they're hearing from their internal employees. Internal employees are looking for more internal mobility opportunities as
yeah, and Colin, you mentioned internal. Yeah, you mentioned internal mobility.
Ship.
Colin, you mentioned internal mobility. I think one of the interesting things that I heard from a talent leader earlier this week was, for everything that they're trying to do, all roads start internal first. And they're trying to maximize their existing their existing talent and their existing employees to understand how they can be applied to whatever the next needs are. And I think, as much as that sounds as much as that sounds like common sense, historically, you know, our instinct and our muscle was always external. Let's add a rec, let's go hire. Who else can we find, rather than who do we have, right? So I think one of the things that's definitely happening is, as people get more data and get more insight and get greater understanding of concepts like skills and work, they're looking at who do they have on their team, what are they capable of doing, and what are the things that they need to get done. And some people are starting to realize, if I have 10 people operating at 80% of capacity, or I'm only utilizing 80% of their skills, I don't have 10 people, I have 8.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that we're talking about in a lot of these jobs reports, or the comparison of applicants to openings or hires to availability, is a lot of that has been done through a lens of kind of a one-to-one relationship of people to jobs.
Yeah.
And I think what we're starting to get down is a level below that, of actually looking at the relationship of skills to work. And that's more of a many to many comparison, and starts to look and feel very different. I think you've been having some conversations along those lines too.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, what I'm hearing from talent leaders is framed as a skills supply and demand challenge. So, you know, if they know what they are trying to deliver, what are the tasks that need to be done in order to make what they need to make, or deliver the services that they need to deliver, what are the skills that are needed to actually make that happen? And so then the demand for skills is, what do they need and what is the market dictating? And then the supply is, what do they have? And they're really trying to create a match for that, as opposed to, if I have 1,000 jobs to do the work, do I have 1,000 people right? And that goes to your point of, you know, 80% of capacity, where there's excess skill capacity. Talent leaders now are starting to think, at least the more forward ones that I'm talking to, they're starting to think about, how do they take that extra 20% capacity and deploy that in ways that can drive revenue, increase employee engagement, or improve organizational culture, if that has a benefit that in terms of retention, in terms of the ability to drive revenue because you keep the people that you have. Very interesting way of thinking about it that was not the case 5 years ago.
Yeah, I've always worked in environments that were very lean. And especially working in HR, when you're an SG&A function and you're often categorized on the ledger as overhead, right? Not only were they lean, they were always being asked to get leaner. And one of the things I've always said is, if you gave me 20 people that were highly skilled, I'll take on a department of 50 of people that aren't as skilled or aren't being utilized to their full capability. And I think that's a lot of the reality of the world that people are living in today. But now we're actually getting more granular to understand what are the skills that are needed, and what are the skills that people possess, to start to actually do some of that analysis.
Yeah. Well, and I'll give you a simple example. I think that the way a lot of the conversations I'm having, if you go from the talent leader perspective, where we're talking about skill supply and demand, if you go down to the recruiter perspective, like, where the rubber hits the road, many of them are starting to think much more deeply about the job descriptions that they write, and they're putting less fluff around, narrative descriptions, and more about what the skills they need are, so that individuals who are looking at those jobs can think about a match to the skill. Do I have this skill? Could I learn this skill quickly? As opposed to, do I like the first 3 paragraphs of this job posting, and can I interpret whether I'm a fit for it or not? And so I think that's a tangible example of where you're starting to see skills. We know skills are the currency of talent, but where you're really starting to see it in a more tangible way, where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah. In a former life, I was an industry analyst, and 2 of my favorite pieces of research that were done while I was working in that world, we examined all job postings across Fortune 1000 companies over a 3-year period, and we looked at them both in North America and in Europe. And when they analyzed all of the job postings from that audience for those 3-year period, they boiled down the total volume of job postings to discover that almost 50% of that volume was looking for the same 36 roles. Right. So,
Yeah.
number one, everyone was going after the same similar talent.
Yeah.
Right. So all the reason why you need to start discovering new ways to identify who's capable of doing that work and generating additional audience. But the other part of it was over that 3-year period, we saw that year over year, there was a 30% increase in the number of skills being listed on job descriptions. But at the same time, the increase of skills that were being incorporated were also many historical skills that wouldn't be needed in more than 2 or 3 years. So to use one of my favorite movie quotes, I always say I'm a Gen Xer, so I speak in movie quotes. For the folks out there working on those job descriptions, you must choose, but choose wisely.
Yeah. Or one of my favorite movie quotes, of course, with great power comes great responsibility, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that, I think it's been so wonderful to have you on our little coffee talk in Jolts and Jobs in Java. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation, and the good news and bad news of that is we'll probably have you back.
I'd love to be back. Thank you again for including me. Jason, always enjoy the dialogue.
Thank you so much, Colin. Back to you, Callie.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to our special guest, Colin. And as always, Jason, for sharing your insights. We hope you'll tune in again next month for the next Jobs Talk with Eightfold AI. And we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.